I'd like to talk today about how we as human beings may be unconsciously sabotaging our own health. One of the things that I've realized recently, really in the last 9 months, is that there is a very high level of anxiety in people's bodies that fundamentally makes it uncomfortable for us to be present, to be embodied, and to really feel what's going on internally, because there is so much upheaval and turbulence around us all the time. I don't know when you're going to actually be watching this particular blog, but I know right now when I'm recording it, we have 2 hurricanes that have just come through. There are wildfires in the West, and we have so much turbulence politically that people are fundamentally dislocated from themselves, because it's the only way to really be comfortable right now in the culture. And I think this is pretty universal. And so I want to speak to it because what it means is that we are losing the information that the really exquisite navigational system of the body is constantly signaling us with. And I'll give you just a simple example of this. My colleague got a call from her doctor's office while I was standing there with her. And she immediately went to her head and she got really anxious. Oh my God. Oh, my doctor's office just called. That can't be good news. Oh my God. Oh my God. I said, okay. And I checked into my gut. I went into my own body, checked in, and thought, nothing's wrong. But I said to her, let's call the office right now. Let's stop what we're doing. You go ahead and call your doctor's office. What the message said was, read the email that we just sent you. So now her anxiety is, and I said, no problem. Go ahead, read the email. And so of course she read the email and it said, oh, your mammogram came out beautifully, no problem. But in that time frame, because she wasn't in her body, she went into such a state of anxiousness about what the information was that she had just gotten. And I see this around me all the time. In classes, someone will say something to me like, do you know what it means that every major joint in my body aches? And there's this look of anxiety on that participant's face when they ask that question, because they're not connecting with their own internal system in order to be able to check it out. Now, this is one of the things in craniosacral therapy, which is my given doorway into the body initially. It's not the only way I help people embody, but it's one of the main ways. In craniosacral therapy, we talk about the fact that the body has an innate intelligence. Every cell in the body, we call it cellular intelligence, has a knowing and a wisdom. And that every cell in your body is connected to every other cell. And so trouble happens in terms of navigating through your wisdom and really listening to it when things get compartmentalized and locked out of the rest of the systems of the body. So let's say that you take a very hard fall on your coccyx and sacrum. I don't know many adults in the world today who haven't taken a fall at some point, really jamming up their sacrum into their spine, so that there's a compartmentalization, there's a pulling in and a tension there, that the signals can't get into the sacrum well, and the blood flow's not getting in and out well, and the person will often start to feel cut off from that part of themselves. And by the way, the pelvis is one of the main wisdom areas of the body. So if you're not connected any longer with your pelvis because you've had an injury to your sacrum or your coccyx or anywhere in the pelvic floor area, then you're missing the signals that that part of your body is sending you. Now, that really speaks to the fact that you can have trauma. Now, trauma is of many, many different types. I loved, and this is kind of a creative edge for me, I love looking at and defining trauma, because many, many times people will come in with something that was quite small. You know, in the whole scope of things, it was this big, but it was something that was so huge to them at the time that it's held in their bodies, like locked in and locked down. And so I think that that particular piece is something we have to look at. You cannot judge anyone else's trauma and say, oh, that was not a big deal. You don't need to worry about that. You shouldn't be upset about that. No, what feels traumatic to people is very, very unique to each person. And Dawson Church did a really interesting piece on this in his book about psychological trauma. He said that a traumatic event is one in which the person perceives the threat as something that is threatening their physical survival. So it means that at the time of the threat, even if it isn't life-threatening, that however small you are or however weaker you are than the person that harms you, you feel like your life is in danger. Okay, that's number one. Number two, it also, in order for the body to tighten down on it and hold on to it, it has to be overwhelming their coping capacity. So it produces a sense of powerlessness in the person receiving that trauma at the time. It also needs to produce a sense of isolation and aloneness, because people don't respond to us, or they respond to us in ways that aren't kind or helpful. And then it also violates their expectations. And he tells this very interesting story. He says that he worked with someone who was a little girl, and she grew up with an older brother, and he used to put a pillow over her face and tickle her and keep her from being able to get up. Now, at the time, he was her older brother. He was bigger. So this clearly, she would start to feel panicked, like she couldn't breathe, even though technically she could, right? So not only was she feeling like her physical survival was being threatened, but she also felt overwhelmed. She was too little to actually be able to do anything against him. So when she would go, and of course she'd start to scream and cry, and her mother would come in, and then she would see her, obviously her brother would jump off and say, oh, look, see, there's no problem. I don't know why she's crying. And her mother would chastise her for crying and basically say, you know, this is your problem. What's wrong with you? In doing that, it actually violates her expectation that her mother would come to her aid and would see that she was really upset. So here, this is a very simple example. She actually wasn't physically injured, nor was her physical survival actually threatened, but it felt like it was. And so here are the 4 things that he defines. And I love this, because if you look at them, it's like, whoa, yes. Now, I love this because in craniosacral therapy, we talk a lot about how trauma comes into the body. And if it's not overwhelming, like if you're a kid and you fall and bump your head, but you're having a good time and you get up and you run away, the body just dissipates it and moves on. No problem. It just dissipates. But if it feels overwhelming, if the child's afraid, if there's some sort of negative emotional matrix at the time of the trauma, which goes right along with what Dawson Church is saying here, then the body walls it off, encapsulates it, and it does what Dr. Upledger called, it forms an energy cyst. And those energy cysts can pile one on top of the other in the body across our lifetime if we don't do something to heal and open it up. Now, this is the way in which trauma then keeps us from having access to this incredible navigational system, because it means that you cannot actually feel a given area. It's walled off from you. So think about this, because many times you have cultural things, environmental things, which we certainly are having right now. You can have political things going on that are very overwhelming to people. You can have physical things happening, emotional things happening, and they're all creating an anxiety and a lockdown in the body that makes it almost impossible to check inside and see, really, how am I doing? What do I need? So you can be doing all the right things. You can be eating the right diet. You can be going to your weekly yoga class. You can be in a healthy relationship. And yet, if any of these other things have gone on in the past and haven't been released, or if you have an ongoing issue because there's something going on culturally, politically, now your system almost has a constant drain on it. And this becomes something that's problematic for us in terms of really living and having all the joy that's really available to us.